Guest who's really at the opposite end of the spectrum to our previous speaker, but there are some serious things going on in the world which need serious addressing. Now, Brian Gerrish is a former naval officer and indeed a submarine warfare expert, I believe. Not submariner. And Brian, over the last few years, has been investigating an organisation or an initiative called Common Purpose, which seems to be a slightly sinister attempt to pull us into a federal EU and maybe worse, including even possibly the state-sponsored kidnap of children. Sounds extreme, and yet, when you look at the evidence, there's definitely something here to be investigated. So I think we're going to have a very interesting hour ahead. So please give a round of applause to Mr. Brian Gerrish.
Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me in the back? I can't see you too well, so put a hand up if it's okay. You can hear? Okay. All right, thank you very much, Andy, for that welcome, and it's very nice to be here, and it's great to see so many people in the hall. I'm just being a bit precise about my background. I was a naval officer. I was a surface ship officer trained to find submarines. And I wasn't a submariner. I did spend a little bit of time in submarines, but I wasn't a submariner. I have to tell you that, otherwise all my friends out there who were submarine trained get a bit stroppy. Now, I'm going to be talking mainly about an organisation called Common Purpose. Some of you, I recognise the faces, and it's great to see you again, but I hope we've got new faces in the audience. So can I just ask those that have seen or heard me talk about Common Purpose, can I ask you if you'll put a hand up, please? Right, okay, thank you very much for that. That's excellent. So most of you are newcomers, which I'm delighted, because I'm trying to get a message out. Now, when you are asked to give a talk, it's always good to find out what you're doing it for. And when I was invited to the Symposium, I thought, I'm not sure I know what a symposium is. So I did a little bit of work, and this was this is absolutely accurate, okay? And I haven't seen a sign of a beer yet, but I think it'll come later on. And I'm not sure what you guys are up to, but well done anyway. And there will be photos. When I left the Navy, I basically set up a little business which got bigger. This was in Plymouth. And when I got to a stage of being comfortable, however you want to define that, I got interested in helping the local community in the Devonport area, where there was a lot of unemployment, particularly amongst teenagers, people in their 20s. With another ex-naval officer, we decided we would try and get a little project together to create skills training and jobs. And to cut a very long story short, although the people in the community liked it and we initially got a lot of support, we eventually had the project cut dead by the establishment. So that was the City Council, the Government Office of the South West, the Regional Development Agency. So a lot of the Quangos who'd initially helped us stopped helping us. And when we tried to dig and find why, we eventually got threatened. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this bit too much, but if you say, why am I here talking to you? Because I discovered that life in my country was not like I'd imagined it to be when I was away at sea. And we discovered fraud and corruption and bullying and threats, millions of pounds being misappropriated. The police didn't want to get involved. And in some cases, the police started to threaten members of the public who wanted to get the truth out. So we started a newspaper. It was originally called the Devonport Column, and it was an A4 sheet. We published 500, and lots of people threatened to sue, but they didn't because we told the truth. And then the paper got bigger, and we now produce this paper. It's donation run, so we can't publish every month, but some months we have put out 100,000. And we are telling the truth as we know it. And I'm going to try and give you this afternoon some information on things you might not know And you might find difficult to believe, but it's true. Have we got a problem in this country? What's your answer to that? Yes. Okay. Now, you might come from different political persuasions, and I don't mind because I'm working with all sorts of people, from mainstream parties, from smaller parties, and people who are not interested in party politics. But all of them have got this sense of unease. They sense something's wrong in the country, but they can't put a finger on it. But we have got a problem. At the moment, we can look at Westminster and we can see that something's very wrong. It's like it's crumbling. Now, how many of you were angry or are angry with what the MPs got up to? Yes, okay. Well, I was pretty angry as well, but I'd like to say something perhaps a bit different to you. I think the MPs were duped. What I mean is, I think that somebody put a big trough full of money and then they encouraged them to feed from it. And some of the MPs kept trying to say when they were interviewed on television, but we were encouraged. They said claim. And whilst I know some of those MPs are crooks, I think a lot of them were actually telling the truth, that they were encouraged to take more and more of these allowances. It's your right. You're not paid very much, so you can take them. And then when they fed, they were exposed. And that's called entrapment. And the reason that they were exposed is because now people are saying, why do we need these people? Do we really need Westminster? And what's hovering in the background is the fact that Westminster's to be closed down because your government is going to come from Brussels. And you haven't voted on this and you haven't had a referendum. So I think there's something very deceitful has been going on in Westminster. But when you dig, people tend to get threatened. So the wartime photograph is a bit appropriate. Now, what's going on in society? Does this sound familiar? Does it look familiar? We've got a police state building. Speed cameras everywhere. They're now going to record your journeys over long distances. Policemen with head cameras. Pubs are closing. Why are the pubs closing? Because they are places where traditionally we've met to have a drink and talk, and in talking we talk politics. So now the supermarkets sell the cheap alcohol, and we tax the pubs out of existence, and therefore we don't have a society discussing things. They are fingerprinting your children. It's already happening in many schools in Devon. As an example, there are now systems in the library that when the children play at looking at books online, they're actually having their fingerprints taken. If you don't believe me, you go and check with your school. We're involved in the torture of people. That is clearly happening. We've got the so-called yob culture, but I learned a lot about that when I started to see where there was training or a lack of it. We've got churches being pulled down. And if I just run through these very quickly, we've now got people losing their homes. We've got very aggressive police, as we've seen from the G20 incident. And those of you who've been reading the national papers will have seen that the Met police are accused of torture and waterboarding people. We've got CCTV cameras down here, all over the place. Recycling. Tetramast, another part of the police communications. We've got an alcohol problem on the streets, and people are particularly distressed that young girls are now showing a decline into drunkenness. The fishing fleet has been wiped out. Agriculture has been wiped out. Foot and mouth has destroyed a lot of the farming stock. And the recycling appeared again because I have to use it more than once, otherwise it's wasteful. It's the best I can do, actually, at the moment. Here's a problem. At the moment, this does not appear on mainstream television. Nothing is said about the European Union. Nothing is said that it's a dictatorship, and it is a dictatorship because the Commission makes the rules and it meets in secret. It hasn't audited any accounts since it's been in existence. It is a dictatorship, and the BBC has not had one in-depth programme exposing the EU for what it is. But the EU is only the part of something that's coming. I've noticed that there are strange things around in the country. And if you drive down the A38, many of you will have seen this man. It's on the western side of the carriageway, so it's on your left as you're coming north. How many of you have seen the Wicker Man? Now, I know there's an interesting audience here, but it's a Wicker Man. And it was paid for out of public money, and then when it needed to be refurbished, they spent another £23,000 on it, and when it was burnt down, they paid to have it rebuilt. But it's Wicker Man. There are other weird pieces of artwork appearing around the country. This is from up in the Midlands, but they're basically eggs. Sorry, I'll move around if I'm in your way. And some of these, particularly young children, find quite disturbing. This one is up in Wales, and okay, it's only oak leaves, but when you see them out of context, it distorts your sense of reality. This one's a bit more interesting. This is in a shopping centre up in Basingstoke, and the local children have got it weighed off, to use a naval expression, because they call it the Wicked Willy. And you laugh, but actually it's a phallus, and it suddenly appeared in a shopping centre, and you ask why and who paid for it. And if you talk to people, and if you keep your eyes open as you go around the country, you will see more and more of this artwork appearing. These are totem poles which are outside a boatyard in Plymouth, and there's quite a lot of totem poles now appeared around the city in Plymouth. This isn't accidental. This artwork has a purpose. It's generally unsettling. Some of it's very distasteful. And it's actually designed to start to chew away at your mentality. Now, you might not believe what I'm saying to you at the moment, but I would say to you, when you travel and you're going in around cities, keep your eyes open, because you will see some pretty appalling artwork. And it suddenly appeared over the last sort of 5 years in particular. Do bad people exist? You're all happy with that, are you? It's true, isn't it? There are good people and there are bad people. Now, this man is a bad person, but if you think of the power he's had in shaping how this country is after 10 years, maybe, just maybe, some of the things that you see around you and don't like have originated from Tony. He's now probably going to become head of the President of the European Union, and he's also got his faith foundation. So he switched from being a prime minister to helping to create a world church, never mind the wars that he's also created. So there's some nasty people around. And I'm sorry Gordon Brown's in the same mould. At the moment he's running a dictatorship. It's obvious it's a dictatorship, but nobody's challenging it. But bad people can come in other forms as well. So we could have somebody like this. Does anybody recognize this man? Well, you should be able to guess who it is, because the similarity is tremendous. Right. We are just swapping one regime for another regime. Okay? And basically there is no difference in these people. Their political indoctrination is exactly the same. Their objective is just the same. They may look different or operate in different parties. And if you're sitting there for Lib Dems and are feeling squeaky clean, I'm going to disappoint you, because Mr. Clegg is exactly the same. He's out of the mould, and he is just one of the same type. I believe they're all traitors, because what they are actually doing at the moment is destroying UK from within. And my opinion is, and what I'm trying to get over to you today, is not only the country's being destroyed from the inside, but how they're doing it. And they're doing it by salami slicing. So things are being chopped away, things are being confused, obfuscated, broken down, and it drips across the years. If I go back 20 years, life was not the same as it was now. If we look at hospitals, we are not seeing an improvement in healthcare, we're seeing a decline. We're seeing a decline in behaviour. We're seeing a decline in drunkenness. We're seeing confusion and decline, And I'm going to suggest to you that's when I said, is there something wrong? You all said yes, or most of you did. So there's a reason for it, and these guys are at the back of it. Now what they've done with others is that basically, I've lost my pointer, where are you? If you can just make that out, but under the cloud, what colour is England and Wales and Scotland there, roughly? Sorry, what colour? Green, it's green. What colour is the country on the BBC News? Weather. Can I use the word shitty? It's an adult. It's a shitty brown colour. You live in a green, beautiful country, and we've always been associated with green, the same for Ireland, but now our weather map is a dirty sludge brown. That is deliberate. It's playing around with your mind. So I've gone for a mild green, and actually it's been slightly corrupted by the projector. But if we look at the country, we've got all sorts of chaos. We've got frauds, we've got police state, bent politicians. We've got an anti-Christian culture. We've got a problem with numbers in immigration. We've got quangos, we've got treason, we've got children being taken away from their parents. It's a shambles. It was never perfect, but now it's really bad. And what is happening is that above a smokescreen of the clouds, we've got a number of organisations which are pulling the strings. And I've put the BBC in there because the BBC at the moment to me is outrageous because it is not impartial and it is not giving good, impartial, investigative journalism. We've got a conspiracy between the three main parties. They play a game. If you've seen some of the TV screens, when Parliament's supposed to be full for debate, it's empty. So we hear the Conservatives talk as though they're going to do something, but they're not. And we've got an organisation called Common Purpose, and we've certainly got a European Union, and the people who are really pulling the strings have got to be the bankers. £900 billion given to the bankers from where? Where did that money come from? And what have they done with it? They've started paying themselves the bonuses again. Meanwhile, we can have a 20% cut in public services, including care. So why aren't we challenging the government? Why aren't we challenging Mr. Clegg? Why aren't we challenging Cameron? And one of the reasons is because everybody's lost their way a bit. And you've lost your way, and I'd lost my way at one point, because I was being steered by propaganda instead of thinking for myself. Now, these people are gently manoeuvring us into a police state. And I've got to go quickly because I've got to move on. But basically, here's some points about what a police state is. And if you compare those key points with what is happening in this country, we're in a police state. We're governed by an elite who are making themselves untouchable. Propaganda for the state takes precedence over the truth and free press. That's got to be true at the moment. We don't see any overseas news. We're not hearing anything about America. We're not hearing anything about the riots that have taken place in European countries. There's nothing. Children brainwashed. It's happening in the schools. And torture, I keep coming back to torture. It hasn't been the way of our country, and yet now we're involved in it. So there's something going on. Something else was happening that we didn't expect in the beginning when we started our paper. People began to tell us stories about children being taken away. And in the beginning you thought, no, this can't be right, because the mother would say, well, I discovered they were all working against me and they lied and they falsified documents. And then I discovered my barrister was working with their barrister, and then they took my children away, and now I can't see my children. And we heard it once and then twice, and then we started to see a pattern over the country, and then people began to bring evidence, files of it, with documents showing all those things. False evidence, perjury, bullying, threats by the police. And we started to see that society was beginning to collapse to such a point that not even children were safe. And in September, I think it's the 13th, 14th, and 15th September, I'm going to do a talk specifically on child stealing by the state. I'm mentioning it here, but when you read the stories in the paper, that is only the tip of the iceberg. There are thousands of children being taken under false pretenses from their parents, and if we can't protect our children, we've nearly got no home and country and state left. This is a picture of a gentleman on the left in the blue suit, John Kelly, who was taken to court by the BBC for failing to pay his TV licence for 8 years. He's refused to pay it because of blatant pro-EU bias by the BBC. It was a small court in Exeter. It was the smallest court. They only allowed 6 members of the public in and 2 members of the press. And basically, he was not allowed to present his defence. So he had a prepared defence. They stopped him from reading it and then basically fined him £60 with £300 costs. It was a kangaroo court. And this is the same sort of court system that the mothers and fathers are talking about when they have their children taken away. So, although the crowd paid most of his fine, this was one man who tried to challenge the system and had to pay. I'm sorry, because it's a nice sunny day. But if you've ever wondered how the Germans ended up in the state they did, it was because under the surface it crept in. We have 2 elderly German ladies. They're in their 80s. They both actually, it's gone out of my head now where they came from. Come to me in a minute. They were bombed out by the British in a German city and then ultimately married British servicemen and moved back to England to different parts of the country, Hamburg. And those ladies contacted the paper independently and they said, in their own words, "Why can't people see it happening? It's just like Germany. Rules, powers given to, not parking attendants then, but rules and powers given to relatively petty officials. The children given an induction in school, a brainwashing." So these elderly German ladies are beside themselves in warning that what they see happening in UK now is exactly what they saw coming in Germany. And by the time I get on to the next bit, and I'm watching the faces, I think I convince you that something serious is going wrong. Now, the good news is that if we do something and we learn what's going on, we can stop this happening. But I'm not here for fun. I do a lot of these talks, and I'm standing in front of you as a military-trained person because I think some individuals are trying to kill us. It may be through poisoning the water, if you're interested in fluoride, or it may be to do with chemtrails, or it may be to do with what's going on with drugs in the hospitals. But my professional opinion, and the people I work with, many of whom are ex-forces, is that we are a target. Does anybody recognise these statements? Well, you're close. This is straight out of the Communist Manifesto. And if any of you think that the communists per se have disappeared and that was what the Berlin Wall was about, I can tell you absolutely not. What you watched was a show. It was a change of face, helped by the BBC, which over a matter of weeks tried to pound into everybody that the Soviet administration had disappeared. It never did. But I'm not talking pure communism, because partly what's happening has got a slightly fascist taint to it. It's somewhere between the two. And that's no surprise, because if you go hard right and hard left, you arrive at the same place, dictators. This is what the Communist International said in 1928. And I'm very interested by the regionalisation, because you know now that you live in the southwest region, don't you? And in Cornwall, all of the local authorities have gone to be replaced by one unitary authority called Cornwall, which is now ruled by about 8 people. It's a dictatorship, and Cornish councillors who were laughing at me approximately 3 years ago are now phoning me up to ask me what they should do. I've said to a couple of them they should pray, and I actually meant it. So these people are talking about creating a new world order, and if you've been listening to good old Gordon Brown and Cameron and Obama, they're using this terminology, and that is because that's what they're working to create. Now, I've only got the remains of an hour. I can't explain it all to you, but I hope if I can show you something that's happening inside this country, it will actually spur you on to research for yourselves to see that what I'm saying is true. This is the key. If you're going to attack somebody, it's best not to show yourself. If I start to attack the government and they can see me, they come back and attack me, which they're starting to do. So you try and do it in a deceitful way. You hide in the shadows. That's what a sniper does. And this is the definition from the dictionary. I didn't just look up Symposium. I found this one out as well. But it's not nice stuff. Infiltration, overthrow, upset. Psychopolitics is an art of destroying a nation by messing around with its psyche. And this is the comment by a chap called Bera, who was part of Stalin's secret police. He used to murder people in his spare time. And what he said here is that by mixing up psycho stuff with politics, you can gradually mess around with the morality and cohesiveness of a nation. And he says our fruits are grown in chaos, distrust, economic depression, and scientific turmoil. Do you think that sums it up in this country? Men are to be replaced, I think, now, because we can develop sperm from skin, so that's got rid of that problem. We can grow ears on mice. We're heading for a mega depression. That's definitely coming, because that's part of the technique for uniting the regions. And it's a great surprise that this man actually is using it as a weapon. If you dig deeper, you find that that mentality was continued. So how many of you have heard of the Frankfurt School? Not very many. Well, basically in 1923 in Frankfurt, Germany, a number of psychologists and early psychiatrists were studying the breakdown of social order. Nice people. And they were particularly interested in morality and the family and spiritual breakdown. Now, those pieces of artwork, if you look around the country, many of them are quite offensive. There's one by a guy called Damien Hirst, which is a sort of huge model of a pregnant woman where the whole of one side of her face and her stomach is cut away. So you see the skeleton and then you see the unborn child. It's very offensive, but the government effectively spent millions on having this thing put up. Now, what they're doing is slowly destroying your morality. And why do you want to do that? Well, if you have a society which is basically moral, and I'm not going to preach to you, you can have an idea in your own heads as to what that means. But if you have basic morality, you can see people who don't conform. They stand out. Now, on one hand, they might be a sociopath, which means they don't fit in with society. Or as an extreme, they can be a psychopath. They really don't fit in. But because the bulk of people have a normality, these strangers can be seen. As you create turbulence, so they become more difficult to see. And there is a particular Polish lady who's done a lot of research into this, and she says we need to watch out because our society is being taken over by sociopaths and psychopaths. And that's, of course, what happens in dictatorships. So that was the Frankfurt School. But here's something closer to home. How many of you know about the Fabian Society? Because that was born on the back of the Frankfurt School. And its objective is to implement socialism by slow creeping steps. But they're pretty hard-hitting because these men are hammering the globe into a new world of their making. Who's involved with the Fabian Society? Now, there may be some of you in the room, and you might be feeling upset with me, but I'll say, I'm not getting at you. I'm trying to make you understand what the bigger picture is, because somebody like Tony Blair was chairman of the Fabian Society, and many, many other of the MPs are involved, but they just don't tell you very much. But what the Fabians want is to change our society from the democracy is at the moment into a new form. I know you can't read it, but this is a document which came out of the Soviet Union, and it said how they were going to go about destroying Western democracies. So down the left, if you can see that tiny dot, are areas: religion, education, law and order. This is what they're going to do, and this is the result. So if we go for families, they're going to work to break it up, and then there's no loyalty, so the state can claim the children. If you look at the academy schools coming online now, which some of you might think are very nice, the academy school's going to take the children from as soon as they can go away from mum, 3, 4, and they're going to stay till 18, and each child is going to get counselling, whether they need it or not. So this was a plan, and ultimately it was heading towards destabilising countries. And I'm going to suggest to you, if you follow the news you can get hold of, this country's beginning to get unstable because people are getting angry. There have already been riots, and I believe that this government is trying to push us towards more violence so that they can implement a clampdown on the country. And if you talk to friends in the police, they will tell you they're being taken away for special training to cope with civil emergencies. The same with the fire service. Check it out. They're getting new equipment, more tasers, more vehicles. And that is because they are trying to get us towards a close down. Now, this is the problem. We are at the bottom of the pile. The people who are driving this program believe we are no better than animals. In fact, cattle. And I use that word deliberately. You can find out why. We thought these people looked after us. So at the moment, many people think that this is our world. These people do all the control, make all the rules, and that's what making the country tick. Well, they're absolutely wrong. Because what is really driving the country are these things: change agents, they're quangos, they're charities that are sucking up huge amounts of money, and they are injecting the policy on sex education, the policy on prisons and criminals, what is to happen with defence. And some of them are not just dealing with what happens inside a nation, some of them are working towards that new world order. So if you've never heard the term Trilateral Commission, or you've never heard about the Bilderbergers, which is not edible, look it up on the internet. Yeah? Now, these people are pushing ideas and policy into like a cuckoo in society. If you imagine it as a cuckoo that's grown inside our society, and it's called the third sector. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown have talked about the third sector quite a lot, and they talk about it a lot because they know that it's controlling society. There's over 1,300 government departments. We never used to have them to run the country, so why do we need them now? The answer is because they are political control. And in the country, we have over 170,000 charities. Check it yourself with the Charities Commission, and the budget for these charities is 44 billion. So if we've got 170,000 charities, we haven't got a problem in the country. There can't be a child who's not looked after or an old person, surely. But it's not like that, is it? because we're seeing more poverty than ever, and yet we've got 44 billion going into charities. And the reason is that the top charities are not really charities at all. They're agents of a government program. And I don't want to appear too cynical, but I am now highly suspicious about the largest charities. NSPCC has already put its head above the parapet in showing a pro-European bias, which was picked up in some of the other papers. So these people who are now out of sight, many of them paid huge salaries, $250,000 a year for the average chief executive of a public sector authority, are creating policy. They're taking it from the change agents, and I've put a big one at the top, demos, for a reason. It's Marxist. And they pump the policy back into Parliament, and they rubber stamp it. And that's why you don't see debate in Parliament, because there are no ideas for policy being created in Parliament. The ideas are all being created in the third sector. And all of the, I got told off for using the word, but it's the right one, all the shit drops on us. So we're at the bottom of the pile, and now we're reeling under legislation. We're going to be taxed more, green taxes. If the bin's out on the wrong day, you're going to be put in prison. You know it's happening, and all of it is coming through this sector. It's got a common purpose. When you take a detached look at what's happening, you get a creepy feeling that these bodies are working together. And that's why very often if you say, I don't like what's happening, but I can't seem to stop it. I talk to my MP and she doesn't do anything. Or I go and see my local councillor and he says he can't do anything. It's like there's a big monster getting closer and closer, but you can't quite see it. And it's because these people are working with a common purpose. This is the organisation. Now, I've got, whatever it is now, 20 minutes to talk to you about this organisation. How many of you have heard of Common Purpose before? Okay, thank you. You should all be interested in it, because overwhelmingly this charity uses taxpayers' money. And what it's doing is creating major change in this country by setting up a network of people. This lady's the chief executive. She absolutely detests me. And I am very happy with that situation. She doesn't like me because I've started to put a spotlight on her charity. She's threatened legal action. It's never happened. And I suggest to you the reason it's never happened is because not only am I telling you the truth, I've got the evidence to back it up. She appeared out of nowhere after working for the Work Foundation and Demos. So her background is sort of Swiss finishing schools, and then she's into politics. And then she's been given £500,000 to start a charity. Now, if you've ever been involved with a charity, and I'm sure some of you have, you'll know how difficult it is to get money. But this lady had $500,000 in no time at all. And from that point on, she started to teach all manner of people about leadership. I haven't got time to play you all of this, so I can only give you a taster, and I'll explain why, and I'll let you know where you can see the rest. So this is Julia Middleton going to talk to you about leadership. It's scary. I hope.
I think you do have to be brave as a leader. And I think you as a leader, you have to be particularly brave if you move outside your own space. Because the chances are very, very high that you will make mistakes. You're going into a space that almost by definition everybody around you will know more about what they're talking about than you do. You might have lost the habit of making mistakes. Maybe you've got quite good in your own space. Maybe you're used to being good in your own space and then you move out of it and you begin to trip yourself up and you make mistakes, and sometimes you don't mean to. Some of the instincts that have served you so well in your own space can almost lead you to do the wrong thing. The best example I can give you of this is I have 5 children, and they are all absolutely beautiful sailors, and all like their father, beautiful sailors. And I hate the sea and I loathe boats, and it is my maternal duty once a year to spend most of August sailing off the west coast of Scotland. And
I've got to stop Julia there because I haven't got much time. But if I can explain, that lady is using a particular technique in telling this story. Now, we got interested in how Common Purpose was recruiting large numbers of people, thousands of people. And I'm going to show you the evidence for this. Those people were then carrying out a common purpose within the public sector, within the police, fire service, schools, military, all over the place. Now, we knew that very often people who were involved with it would act out of character. We discovered they would lie, or they would cover up their involvement, and that seems strange. If you're involved with a wonderful leadership charity, why don't you boast about it? And then we began to realise that something was going on. Now, about 2 months ago, a gentleman contacted me who was a trained neuro-linguistic programmer. Now, if you haven't heard of that, it's effectively a form of hypnosis, but it's very subtle, so I can talk to you, and if I was skilled, I could be imparting more than one message to you by the words I was using and how I used my hands. And what he said to me is he'd seen Julia Middleton, and he said, I can tell you, Brian, as a fully trained master practitioner, that this lady is neuro-linguistic programmed up to the eyeballs. And what Common Purpose is doing is actually using that technique on other people. Now, in the earliest days, when we started to see nasty things happening in Plymouth, I was told by a member of the community, I think your problem's Common Purpose, and I'd never heard of it. But I started to research. There was a very different website to the one you see now for them, but what we began to realise was you had an organisation that was effectively, I use the word loosely, like a cult, but it was political. And we began to see that actually something was inside of our public sector in particular, steering policy. And this was the organisation that we came to discover. Now, Julia Middleton wrote this book, and I don't advise you to buy it because it's a waste of money from that point of view, but it's worth reading, and if you can get one from a library or borrow it or whatever, do it. Because she uses interesting language. She talks about useful idiots. That's us. Because we're the people who pay for this organisation, and yet they are carrying out a political agenda. And as a charity, they're not allowed to do it. At the bottom, there's a quote where they talk about how to deal with people who are getting in the way of Common Purpose's policy. And it's to undermine them or discredit them or run them over, effectively. So she's using very harsh words. She's also talking about building coalitions and conspiring. So this lady is heavily involved in politics. This, you can't read it, probably at the back. I'll just say to you, if you'll believe me, if you read the aims of Common Purpose, it's so general that you're left wondering what they actually do. But it's to do with educating men and women of different social backgrounds. It looks innocuous, but does it do what it says on the tin? This is the key. When they hold a meeting of these people, it's done under Chatham House rules, which is semi-secret. So they don't say who was in the meeting, there are no minutes, they don't say who gave the information, but they can go away and use it. They're very interested in diversity. And if any of you get squeamish about this, I'm not, because I've given this talk up in the mosque in Birmingham. But there's a little trick. Common Purpose says that on the board of every company, committee, charity, organisation should be an equal number of ethnic groups. And that sounds reasonable, but when you actually apply it, it actually means that the majority will get a smaller and smaller representative voice. The Muslims see it, and the Muslims actually are very frightened about the close down of dictatorship in this country. So I'm not talking on any form of racist terms here. I'm talking about what happens if every different minority that comes into the country gets an equal voice. It ultimately squeezes out the majority. Just think about it. This is Plymouth, where every part of the city we found common purpose involved, everywhere. Judiciary, the police, the hospitals, the schools, and particularly the council in the middle. Why? Because common purpose has said in their own material that if they can get their people into key positions in a city, the leader, the chief executive, the head of social services, the chief of police, you can control a city. And they're doing it. So we now know that cities in this country are actually being controlled by common purpose. They're not being controlled by anybody else. Imagine the roots of a tree growing down. So in every city, they set up what's called advisory boards, and they select people as good candidates for training. This is exactly what the cults do. I know you've got a good job, you've got control over money and budgets, we'll recruit you, and you can bring that money to our cause. And at the bottom, they're very, very interested in children. They were initially targeting 13 to 14-year-olds, now they're down at the little ones, and the average mum and dad doesn't have a clue. This map's a little bit difficult to see, but basically a red dot, if it's on its own, is about 1 to 10 people. And if it's in an urban area like Newcastle, one of those dots is about 100 or 200 people, common purpose trained. And we got very interested in seeing that the spread was basically right away across the country, but also heavily over into Northern Ireland. Now, it may be a coincidence, but South Wales is also heavily targeted. And what is happening in South Wales? Suicides. 29, to be precise now, which people are still having trouble explaining. But the people that I work with are now getting very interested in that a lot of young people are being exposed to neuro-linguistic programming, which they don't even know is being done to them. And the other thing we discovered is there are now suicide clusters starting in Northern Ireland, and those are not even reported in the press. I've got to go quickly. These are some of the documents that a military colleague of mine saw. I have always stated he did not download them, and I chastised him in a very big way, but I'm telling you the truth. I have a witness. This is what he saw. The documents were about controlling cities, selecting children, and grooming them, in effect, politically, and choosing future leaders. It said that ordinary people were going to be suggestively coerced or engineered into the correct society. Did any of you hear Prince Charles giving his Dimbleby lecture? He said some remarkable things in that lecture, and one of the ones that went straight to me was behavioural change. We needed to have more behavioural change. And what I believe he's talking about is neuro-linguistic training. All bodies of responsibility and influence should be involved with common purpose. And your loyalty is to common purpose over and above your organisation. When I saw that, I knew it was a breach of the Official Secrets Act. Now, a little bit of proof, but we've got a lot. I'll give you a little bit. These are real documents to show that I haven't made this up. This was a written request to Devon and Cornwall Police saying, how much have you spent on common purpose training? If you want to see it, see me afterwards and I'll show it. I've got to just go through them as quickly as I can. The answer they gave me in that paragraph with the red line was they can't identify any specific records or documents held by the police concerning common purpose. That's a pretty straightforward reply, isn't it? So I said to them, well, this is strange because I've got the names of 4 of your people who've been trained, including Maria Wallace. It always does it, doesn't it? Maria Wallace was the chief constable at the time. So I gave them some names, and then quick as a flash, they told me they'd spent £57,000. So my question is, how can a police force not know it spent £57,000? Well, the lady who tried to help me gave me the answer because she said, I don't understand it. They kept talking about Chatham House. And what that meant is the people she spoke to were being secretive. I asked for more information, and then they sent me this letter which said they had to ask Common Purpose for permission. So the public pays for the police to train with Common Purpose, and when you ask what did you do, they have to ask Common Purpose's permission before you get the information. Something's wrong. A newspaper. Why doesn't the truth get in newspapers? This is one of the Plymouth papers, the Western Morning News. I spelt the guy's name wrong. It is Qualtrough, but it's spelt differently. And I asked the editor if he was involved with Common Purpose. He sent a letter back saying, you are misinformed. I'm not a graduate, nor do I intend to be one. But the only problem was we already held this piece of paper which showed that he did the course in 2002. Now, this pattern of not telling the truth once you're involved with Common Purpose is repeated across sectors, public, private, schools, hospitals. People lie to protect or stop information from Common Purpose coming out. This is a man in Cumberland. It's a story in the paper there that Common Purpose had breached the Data Protection Act to do with people asking for data on them. So they're so desperate to stop information coming out that they'll even breach the Data Protection Act. This is a little email showing a lady in London councils, Emily, talking to Alison Cusworth, who's a Common Purpose lady, and what they're discussing are freedom of information requests. I've had a member of the public asking me about Common Purpose. I'm Common Purpose. I'm going to talk to my Common Purpose mate in the head office. What do I do? That's illegal. And we now know that Common Purpose as a charity is tracking people like me because they've got a database where they're showing details of who made requests and what they were asking. And there are over 150 names on this blacklist now, and what Common Purpose is doing is starting to try and undermine people by saying that if you dare to question Common Purpose, you must be a right-wing, vicious extremist. Information refused by Cumbria Council because it says the person who sent the letter is part of a vexatious campaign. So here is a charity which under the charity laws is not supposed to be political, but when you ask for information about what it's doing, it doesn't want to tell you. London councils, a similar thing. It leaked data protection material to Common Purpose, got caught, was told to get that information stopped, but Common Purpose refused. And why is Common Purpose arrogant? Because Common Purpose controls the people who should be controlling it. The Ministry of Justice is involved, and here is a letter showing that even the Ministry of Justice released information on somebody to Common Purpose. In error, of course, but I don't believe that. If you think there's problems with justice, we discovered a while ago that there is a memorandum of understanding between the police and the Law Society. They decide in this memorandum which cases will be progressed or not. So it's done in secret, the public don't know about it. And this is a government body starting to research people who are asking the right questions. So this is research from Westminster on Eurosceptic campaigns alleging the abolition of Westminster. And we certainly believe these elections will be the last ever British elections. Because if we don't do something, the European Union is going to take over. And common purpose is the vehicle by which the future leaders are being created. All right, 2 more bits. The Media Standards Trust, now being created by Julia Middleton to ensure the honesty of the media. This has been set up inside the offices of Common Purpose in London. And if you look at who she's mixing with, Sir David Bell of the Financial Times, down the bottom somewhere there's the Rothschilds, there's big bankers, and we've got Robert Peston, the economic man on BBC. He's a big Common Purpose man. This is the not-so-nice stuff. When we initially started to understand Common Purpose and how secretive it was, I'm going to say we got indications that there were some very unsavoury people connected with it. Certainly criminals, but we began to get sniffs of paedophiles. Now, I can tell you, paedophilia is a huge problem in this country. It is going to be exposed, but it isn't dirty old men in raincoats. It involves judges and politicians and peers and senior police officers and senior military officers. And this is how things are being closed down and people are being controlled at the highest levels. But a little while ago, we discovered that this man, James Rennie, who was recently put in prison for running a huge paedophile network in Scotland that were abusing children as young as 3 months, was Common Purpose trained. Now, I am not saying that Common Purpose knew he was a paedophile when they selected him for training. What I am saying is that if you have an organisation which is using a form of mental manipulation, and it is highly secretive, and it is working with social services and schools and children, it's a breeding ground for these people. This man would have been selected as a Common Purpose candidate by an advisory board which included a senior police officer. That's a fact. The police are riddled with NLP training, and this is one organisation which is mixing with the policing academy using NLP. I'll flick through these quickly. We know that there is both NLP and Common Purpose training the police. Are you starting to see the police act in strange ways? Are they political? I believe they are, and we know how it's being done. So here's a bit more. 2 minutes. What do we do about it? First of all, you are right. You are looking around at the country and you're saying something's wrong. It's falling apart. It's chaotic. It doesn't work. It's not nice. You're absolutely right. The people driving it are quite powerful. We are learning a bit about how they're doing it, and we've got to stop them before they get us. Now, this is the good news. There's only a few. They've got a lot of power. They want to destroy us, and I mean that, and they're going to do it in the shadows. And the way to stop it is so easy. If you have a plan which works by being hidden, the moment it can be seen, it doesn't work. So what I hope you will do is go away and start to talk about what's happening and ask questions. Now, in my 30 seconds, if this works, I just want to show you this. This is a London list of common purpose graduates. And I'll just give you some idea of the scale of the problem in London. A course costs £3,500 plus VAT, or if a senior police officer like Cressida Dick does it, £9,000. So you work the sums out yourself, and overwhelmingly, these people have had their courses paid for out of public money. Now, we've got some people coming to us saying their partners did this course and they've changed. One lady said her police husband had changed so much and become so brash and bullish and aggressive, she had to leave him. I could go on to another city, or go on to Leeds for you, and Leeds, exactly the same thing. Now, you never knew about these people, but basically we've got a political charity buried in society, and what it is doing is driving the political agenda. And I've now got councillors coming to us, and they are saying that they can understand what's happening for the first time. One man up in Leeds, he said, it's unbelievable. I've been a councillor for 35 years. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And, come on. I'm just going to go through that. Now I understand common purpose. I know how they're controlling us. Sorry. I just want to show you the website, and then you can go for information yourself. Right, that's my website, cpexposed.com. If you go onto it, it's basically a library. You can call up cities, you can call up the graduates at the top of the screen, and you can search your area to see who's involved. I am not saying common purpose people are bad per se. Most of them are victims because they've become involved in something they have no idea what it's actually doing. So I hope you will dig. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian Gerrish. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any questions?